Hello and welcome to She Leads Collective podcast. I'm Mary Gregory and I'm so glad you're here. This podcast is a space for honest conversations about what it really means to lead as a woman today and how we can all show up with more courage, care and clarity. You'll hear from inspiring women, powerful allies and bold truth tellers who are changing the game, not by playing tougher, but by leading smarter, softer and stronger. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the She Leads Collective podcast. So what happens when half the population's health is still misunderstood, underfunded and under-prioritised, not just medically, but economically and professionally? Women's health is not a niche issue. It affects careers, it affects confidence, it affects attendance, progression, productivity and quality of life as a whole. Yet despite progress, many women still struggle to access diagnosis, treatment and support. We still hear stories of symptoms being dismissed, conditions overlooked and life stages minimised, and I know I have my own stories to share around that too. Today's guest has spent years working at the intersection of women's health, policy, advocacy and commercial leadership. Tina Backhouse is a senior leader and women's health advocate with extensive experience spanning pharma, policy and government relations. She has worked closely with policymakers, clinicians and industry leaders to improve health outcomes and access for women. She also is Co-Chair of Menopause Mandate and is a passionate advocate for tackling inequality in women's healthcare. But this conversation goes beyond policy. Today, we will explore Tina's own leadership journey from growing up in a children's home and developing fierce self-reliance to leading major growth in business to making the courageous decision to step away and redefine what success means for her. Today, we'll talk about women's health, inequality, leadership, purpose, and why investing in women's health may be one of the smartest decisions society can make. Tina, thank you so much for joining me and a warm welcome to you.
Oh, thank you, Mary. Thank you for having me.
It's a real joy to have you here today and there's so much we can talk about, I know. So you have a fascinating personal story because when we first met, you shared that you grew up in a children's home and had to become very self-reliant from quite a young age. How do you think that has shaped you both as a leader and the woman you finally become?
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think when you're growing up, you just assume that everyone has the same kind of struggles that you have. But on reflection, I think my parents died when I was a baby and I grew up in care until I went to university. And I suppose what impact did that have on me? It made me very independent. And I also knew that there was no plan B. You know, the plan A was me. There was no one to bail me out of anything. And I had to really focus on that and really educate myself to be able to move out of the situation I was in. I think it's also, clearly it makes you very resilient. You know, growing up in a children's home in the 70s is not for the faint-hearted, and probably still isn't now, to be honest with you. But so, it makes you very worldly. It makes you very aware that not everybody has the same opportunities. That I suppose it makes you aware of inequality at a very early age, because things aren't the same for everybody. You know that when you go to school and you're treated differently, and you know when your own home circumstances are different, you are very well aware of inequality. And I suppose as I've got older and as I've become a leader, I think it's given me a lot of skills. I think it's given me very good emotional intelligence of understanding that we're all different and people have traumas and people have things that affect them on a daily basis, and we should treat people, kindly and considerately, to help support them through that. It's shown me that life, it can be tough, but you have to not be a victim and try and define that yourself. And I suppose it's also shown me, that women can be extremely strong, and that you can beat anything that really comes your way. And resilience is a really important skill. And I think it's a really important skill as a leader. I think it's really important in business, and I think it's really important for women generally. So it definitely has shaped me, for sure.
Yes, I can hear that. It sounds to me like a classic example of the university of life, really, and
Yeah, I think it
the
is.
absolute strengths it's helped you develop, and the insight and understanding and empathy for others as well.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I always felt weirdly, because my parents had died when I was a baby. Obviously there was a lot of other children in there who were there, I felt, for much worse reasons. They'd been abandoned, they'd been abused, their parents were addicts or violent. So I almost felt weirdly like my parents hadn't chosen to leave me. They hadn't put me up for adoption. They hadn't done all of those things. It was just a terrible um, set of circumstances. So I always felt that the lucky one in that situation, which people find very hard to understand. But I did always feel that. And I always felt that, that gave me an edge in terms of, I feel that, that it was just unlucky that I was there rather than anything else.
So I'm hearing it stopped you feel like a victim. It stopped you feeling
Yeah,
that
I
way.
never felt like a victim. I've never felt like a victim at all. And I feel that's one of the things I find hard if people get into that mindset, and I understand it completely, but you can't really allow yourself to become, to feel like that, because it will derail you. And I never felt like that. I never felt a victim. And I just feel that, life has a plan for you, and sometimes it isn't very clear, but that's just how it has to be.
So you grew up, had developed this enormous resilience and self-reliance, amazing leadership capabilities of empathy and compassion and things, and resourcefulness. And you then built a career for yourself, leading significant growth and navigating very highly commercial environments. When you look back on those days, what are you most proud of?
I think it's I think it's always easy. And I was talking to someone this morning actually who is helping me do some work, and it's very easy to quickly say the commercial success, the building of a business at Theramex from nothing to, almost 100 million in 5 years. All of those things are really easy to say. But I think if I think really deeply about what I'm most proud of, it's always to do with the people, and it's always to do with I've worked with some amazing people. I've recruited amazing people. I always felt that my secret was to recruit people that are much better than me, and that would strengthen the organisation and strengthen my leadership. And I'm most proud, I've worked with, I remember um, when I was at Pfizer, having a junior sales manager work for me, who's now, I think, the global vice president of Pfizer, and I knew straight away, the day I met him, I knew he was real talent. And I'm always really proud of people that I've worked with and who've gone on to do amazing things, whether that's in their career, whether they've decided to go on and write books or dedicate themselves to something else. I just think those are the things I'm most proud of. And sometimes people write you notes or they write you messages and say, you touched me and you helped me in this part of my leadership journey. And I think that's the most important thing to me.
That sounds wonderful. It's really about supporting others to flourish, is what I'm
Yes,
hearing.
definitely, definitely. And especially, when I see other women who perhaps don't have the self-confidence that some of their male counterparts can have. And it can be a very male-dominated world in pharma at senior level. And so when you see those women really flourish, I think that's immensely, um, you know, and I'm also really proud of the fact that in the last 6 years, we have, and I'm just one of the cogs in this, we have changed the way menopause is talked about.
Yes.
When I had my perimenopause, no one spoke about it. No one used the word perimenopause 6 years ago. And people don't believe that, but that's absolutely true. And so for my daughter and other people's daughters, that will be different. We are changing the landscape for them. And that to me is hugely important.
So really making a difference on so many different levels as
Yes.
well. So you made the decision to step away and create space for what comes next. How
Yeah.
did you know it was time to do that?
I I guess I had been thinking about it for a while, and I kept thinking, when this happens, and then I will do this. And I had always almost let the organization, when it goes through organizational change, when it's resold, let that make the decision for me. And I went on a noon group actually with Eleanor Mills to Egypt in November. And it's amazing, of all these different women and different occupations and all giving each other advice. And I suddenly thought, I'm really missing something connecting my values to my work. I had felt that for a long time, and I no longer felt it. So something had changed. Um, and as I said, I'd always kind of thought, oh, when this happens at work, I will make the decision to do something different. And then I was actually working with a colleague from Menopause Mandate, who happens to be a work and life coach. And she said, oh, let me do some work with you. And I was like, okay. And really, the work I did with her really got me to a point where I was saying, okay, these are the things that are really important to me. And now I have to I have to make this happen. And really, what's the worst thing that can happen? And so I went to the organization and said, this is how I feel. And, I want to leave. And they supported that, and I think they were quite shocked, but they supported it. And it was done in a very, very good way. And because I felt very clearly that there was something else that I was meant to be doing, but I couldn't see what that was, because when you're in the trenches, and you know this yourself, when you're in the trenches and you're working so hard and you're dealing with things on a day-to-day basis, you don't have the time to kind of look up and see what's around you and see what's possible. And so by giving myself that time already, I've sat down and, spoken to people, and things that I didn't even know exist, roles that I would never even have known about or even thought about. You're like, oh, I didn't know that was a job. Oh, that people got paid for that. But you can't do that when you're in the trenches. So I felt that I had to do it for my own kind of peace of mind and my own value set. And I suppose, as you know, as you get older, people start to have illnesses, you lose people, you lose friends, and you think life is very, very short. And so you have to make the most of it. And look, my background has always taught me that rightly or wrongly, I have this innate belief that I will always be all right and I'll always make it right. So I have that kind of, I think bravery, some might think stupidity, of feeling that it's going to be okay. I'll make it work.
It's a real fundamental life force, is what I hear. That whole thing of it all, everything will be all right. It's all going to be fine. That is
Yeah.
a really great, motivating core self-belief, actually.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, very good. And that links in with the whole life is short, life is precious. You view life as precious. Do you think
Yes.
that's changed your relationship with ambition and success?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Certainly in my early part of my life, then, obviously getting to university, and it's hard to get to university when, I think at that time, less than 1% of children from the care, um, from care go to higher education. I don't actually think that 40 years later, that is a different figure. I think it's pretty much the same, because everything is stacked against you. And look, it was easier in some ways because we got grants and at that time. So I could afford to go to university because, I got grants and I didn't have to pay tuition fees and all of the other things that I feel quite strongly about. And so I do think that in the early part of your career, you're very ambitious. And certainly when, I worked at Pfizer and I was very ambitious. And then I think having children makes you reevaluate things. I'm a single parent and didn't I didn't want this to be my last job. I felt really strongly about that. I didn't want this to be my last job. And I also didn't want to miss out on things with my children because I was always so working or tired or unhappy, really. And I really felt that, I had the opportunity to really show my daughter especially what you can achieve, and I believe that that has to be outside of a corporation.
And you say that you want to be a CEO of a women's health organisation. You're already co-chair of Menopause Mandate,
Yes.
so you're halfway there in respect. What is the impact you most want to make?
I think the impact I most want to make is to keep the women's health agenda really up there. I think the first women's health strategy came out in 2022 by the previous government, and there was a lot of excitement. There was a lot of fanfare. They obviously appointed Dame Leslie as women's health ambassador, who is amazing, and is a very good friend of mine. And there was very little resource put behind it. But there was some resource, and we'd started to make some inroads with things. But the women's health hubs, and I've seen the impact of women's health hubs in the most deprived areas where they make the most impact. And things we'd started to talk about menopause much more. And then, of course, the government changed. The new government felt they needed a rewrite of the women's health strategy, which again has been done and was published in the last few weeks. But there's very little. There's a lot of very good sentiment and a lot of very good intent in the women's health strategy. But as ever, there is no resource. There is no money. There is no mandate telling healthcare economies that they have to have women's health hubs. They have to provide long-acting contraceptive services or any of these things. There's nothing mandated. And I think we have to so I think the opportunity is to keep the focus on that, find innovative ways that we can deliver. And I think there is innovative ways. And I especially believe that there's ways that we haven't thought of in terms of partnerships with corporates and bigger businesses to help deliver on this women's health strategy. So I'd really like to be involved in making that happen. And I also think that there is a huge part of the women's health strategy that looks at inequity and how things are not equal for all women. And that is something that is very, very important to me. I think people often say to me, oh, well, it's all sorted with menopause. Well, maybe if you're white, middle class and can afford to pay for a menopause specialist, then, that might be the case. But as I said, when we were in Antrophy in Cornwall, if you live in Cornwall, there is one registered menopause specialist for the whole of Cornwall. So that is not the same for every woman. And I also believe that the biggest fight is yet to come. I believe that politics is moving to the right, and that women's health could regress under a more right-wing political vein, as it has in America. And some of the backwards steps that we're seeing in America, people.
You really feel politics is going to go in that direction?
I feel there's a chance. I feel
there's a chance, yes, but I suppose maybe I live in this rose-tinted world where I think we'll see sense before we go
I
that
know, and
far,
I hope
right?
that's the case, and I really hope that's the case. Though I did think that about other things, obviously, but I I think there's a chance. And I think if there is a chance, then we have to be ready for that. I think we have to be, we have to try and get as much momentum and to get as far as we can in the next few years so that if the worst did happen and things started to regress, we would still be further on than we are now. And, that's kind of, you can't control what everybody's going to vote or what everyone's going to decide to do, but we can control how much progress we make in these next 3 years. And I don't think we've got time to waste. So I definitely feel that. Like you, I hope that's not the case, but I hoped that wasn't the case in America. And yet what we're seeing is very, very damaging to the women's health agenda in America.
It certainly is, and they do say what happens in America comes over here. But I don't think I think we also it's within our gift to break that pattern, actually. We don't have to go down that direction. In fact, we can learn from what is happening over there and how horrendous it
Exactly,
is.
exactly. And that's why, you using the voice of 51% of the population, which women are, for women to really understand. I mean, I have this discussion with people all the time. They go, I don't think it will be that bad. And I go, do you understand? Understand what's written in the manifesto, understand the impact that might have on you and your daughters and on healthcare. So I think it is really important. And we've got a lot of work to do in the next 3 years.
Yes. A lot of it's about education, isn't it, really, as
A
well?
lot of it's about education and people understanding and and also that we know that there's feminism has never been more needed than it is right now, I think. And that's what I think. There's a lot, the rise of misogyny in the younger generation, a lot of disenfranchised people, um, and a lot of difficult living circumstances, um, are all contributors to how people are feeling about their political opportunity, I guess.
Well, thank goodness you and your colleagues are here to be taking a stand and campaigning to make a difference. You've talked a lot about health being foundational to gender equality. Can you explain that link? How does women's health affect gender equality?
Yeah. So I absolutely believe, having spent a lot of time, probably too much time, thinking about this very subject, I believe that you cannot have true gender equality if you do not have equality in healthcare. If you do not have a healthcare system that can support women through we're the only creature that, bleeds for, you know, 40 years of their life on a monthly basis and have different diseases and conditions that are linked to that. And we can only have equality in education and equality in the workplace if we understand that. We know, for example, that girls, when they're having heavy periods at school, that and especially black girls are told, well, heavy periods is just what you have to deal with, and it's not just what you have to deal with, actually. So and girls are missing school because of that. Girls are missing school because of tampon poverty and sanitary poverty. And then when they go to university, we know that girls it takes 10 years on average to be diagnosed with endometriosis in this country. We know that girls are dropping out of university and dropping out of education because of these conditions. We know that happens in the workplace. We know that fertility issues can have a huge effect on women in the workplace as they carry on through their gynecological journey. And then, of course, they get to menopause, where we know that 10% of menopausal age women leave the workplace because they don't feel supported and they don't feel that they can be themselves. And it becomes very difficult for them. So all of those things have to contribute to gender equity, because if you're not in the boardroom, if you're not being given a job because You might get pregnant, you might go on fertility treatment, you might have a condition like endometriosis. Oh, now you're in menopause, you might be more difficult as a woman. If you're not in the boardroom because of those issues, then we can't have gender equity. We can't have gender equity unless we're there when decisions are being made. And, if you think about the number of CEOs in female CEOs in the UK, it's actually going backwards. In the last year, I think, two very significant women have left and been replaced by men. So that is going backwards, and we can't have gender equity if we're not at the table. And if our conditions that we have to have, having babies, not having babies, having menopause, having all these other things, if that goes against us, and is a reason for us not to be at a table, whether that's our own belief or whether that's because somebody has fundamentally made a positive decision not to employ us, then it's very difficult to have gender equity. I mean, one of the terrible things about the Labour Party is they have never had a female prime minister. We've had what, three female prime ministers, and they've all been from the Conservative Party. So I think, of course, there is more equality in lots of ways than there were in the 70s, but at the same time, it's certainly not. Women's health is still seen as a niche. People, the fact that GPs aren't always, that still, I think 40% of medical schools are not training their doctors on menopause. I mean, can you imagine?
Well, I have to say, my experience was I had to change doctors
Yeah,
before I got the support that I
yeah.
needed.
And that's what I always say to people. Yeah, and I always say that to people when they say, how can I change my doctor's mind? To say you can't change doctors, find another doctor, because you won't change their mind. And yet this is something we will all go through. I mean, one of the successes of Menopause Mandate, obviously, was that we were able to, with other people, a lot of other charities like Wellbeing of Women and Carolyn Harris, the MP, and lots of different organisations, we were able to ensure that in the over 40 check that they ask the questions about menopause. I mean, can you understand that, Mary? They are doing a health check with women in their 40s, and the one thing that is definitely going to happen to you is the one thing they're not talking to you about. They're talking to you about diabetes, bone health, exercise, all these things, but they're not preparing women who are going into their perimenopause that this is what's going to happen to them, and I mean, we weren't prepared at all, and hopefully we can change that. That it's beyond belief that happened. So, so there is a huge amount, and none of those things mean that there is gender equity. If you, I heard someone recently, very senior, say on, who was a gynecologist, say on Radio 4, well, some GPs don't want to deal with women's health. Well, here's the thing. That's not a choice, because they never say we don't want to deal with children, or, we don't want to deal with your asthma. No GP's ever said to me, I don't know anything about asthma, go and see someone else. No one's ever said that to me. So why are you saying that about women's health? And, so I don't believe we can have proper gender equity without women's health equity. And I also feel that within women's health, there are different levels. And we're seeing that in maternal health now, right? With all the inquiries into Black maternal health and all the other things, that we are seeing that also within women's health itself, there are differences.
So I'm going to bring you back slightly because we'll go into menopause separately in a moment. We'll go back to that. I think what I'm picking up is that so many of women's conditions, particularly when it comes to being at work, are invisible. They might be having awful stomach cramps through menstruating. They might be, or endometriosis, very painful condition. There are lots of things that women have to contend with health-wise that are not visible, and that it's difficult, therefore, for people to appreciate or understand the impact of. How can we engage men who are the ones that still hold the majority of the power in this conversation.
I mean, to be fair, I do think every time we have engaged men in this conversation, we've found a lot of male allies. And and certainly when I've done talks in corporates and things, the questions that you get from men and are the best questions, and men are very practical, like where can they go for help, why, what is available for them, my wife, my sister, my mother. Lots of men, when you're talking about menopause, suddenly think, oh my god, this is what happened to my mum when she went slightly loopy. People say that to me all the time. God, I remember my mum, like, screaming and, throwing the dinner on the floor. And and they say that, and then it's suddenly realization, maybe this is what was happening to them. And so I think engaging, and I think having that open conversation, and the obviously a lot of men have daughters and they want them. No, it's not, as I always say, it's not pie. Health equity for women doesn't mean less health equity for men. It just means the same. And so we're not asking for more. We're just asking, that the NHS, which was, designed by men for men, is adapted to women's health. And so I think that having open conversations about that, I mean, UTIs is a really good example. UTIs, for lots of women, well, can lead to death if they're uncontrolled and, people get sepsis, but they can be life limiting for a lot of women. And, men understanding, that menopause can have such a big effect on women's sex drive and libido, and and relationships not breaking down. These are all really open conversations to have, and I have always been really encouraged by the participation of men in this conversation, and men being invited into the conversation and to understand. And that's why I think the workplace training that the Department of Work and Pensions is doing, and with the well-being of women and their Meno kit, and really educating everybody around these things, in the same way that women want to know about, testicular cancer or BPH or any of the things that affect men. We should be talking about it. And my daughter, who is 16, came home from school recently, and she said, and she's very opinionated about this, obviously, because she's been in a lot of rooms with women talking about women's health. And she said that they'd had a discussion with in an assembly, and that they talked about breast cancer, and they'd all been in the room. And then the girls had to leave, and then they went to talk to them about cervical cancer, and they talked to the boys about testicular cancer. And I just did not understand that, and why they had separated them. And she said that she asked them, and they said, oh well, it's because men can get breast cancer as well, but you can't get testicular cancer and they can't get cervical cancer. But we should be talking to everybody about these things, because unless we do, if we're making them secret that only women know about or only men know about, then that is not equity in the healthcare.
Yes, awareness is so important. So I want to bring us back to the organisational perspective. You talked about the training that Department of Works and Pensions do, and that goes down well. But what else can organisations do to be more mindful, more sensitive, and more supportive of women and their health, to make sure that they maximise their potential at work? Ultimately, it's going to benefit the organisation.
It hugely benefits the organisation, and I think there's a lot of really good workplace education and programs. Wellbeing of Women, for example, run a lot of those programs. Like I say, their Meno kit, their menstrual health checker. And they do a lot of education, and going into workplaces and talking to workplaces about it. The idea that now everybody's got if you've got an organisation over 250, you've got to have a workplace policy on menopause. But you and I both know, Mary, that policies are policies, right? And they can just mean nothing. So really, you've got to look for guidance, like I say, people like Wellbeing of Women, all the different women's charities out there who can really make this come alive for people. And for, it will make huge difference to, the brain drain. If you think about women leaving the workplace post-menopause when they're, they've got their most corporate knowledge, they're big tax contributors, they're big pension contributors.
They're also massively energized post-menopause as well.
Massively energized, and why would you not want to keep those people in your organization? If you've gone to the trouble of recruiting younger women because you think they're talent into the organization, then why would you not want to support them if they're going through a fertility process? So I think, there are lots of resources available. And one of the things I would really like to see with the Department of Work and Pension is that the work they've done on menopause does not stop with menopause, that it is about women's health generally. And I think that's why they have asked Mariella, because she was originally the Department of Work and Pensions ambassador for menopause, and they've asked her to be now the Department of Work and Pensions ambassador for women's health. And I think that's really important because it means that they will be looking at other aspects of women's health within organisations.
Yes, we're talking about Mariella Frostrup.
Yes,
there.
we are. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, great. What a great advocate she is as well. Fantastic ambassador.
Brilliant advocate, and just so energized, and and really takes the bull by the horns, and is a fantastic advocate for women.
Great. Let's move on then to thinking more about menopause. And we've talked quite a bit about it already. But what's your advice to women who are really struggling to get help? Because I know from my perspective, it was a real personal struggle for some time to get the support and help that I needed.
I think, so as ever, any issue in life is always about education, isn't it? And lots of women, I think, struggled and still struggle because they just don't know what's happening to them. That I never knew that I was in menopause because I didn't have a hot flush. I thought, because no one had ever told me, that in order to be in my menopause, my periods needed to stop and I needed to have hot flushes. Now, when those two things didn't happen to me, my periods got very heavy. I had aching joints, I had heart palpitations, and I felt very anxious. But I didn't know that that was perimenopause. So education is vital, that we discuss this with girls at school, that they understand their menstrual, that, for a start at the age of our menstrual journey, that we really understand what that looks like. And also, Mary, that we understand the impact of menopause and, the impact it can have on our long-term health in terms of cardiovascular, osteoporosis, and probably dementia. So I think educating yourself, and there are some really, really good resources out there, like I would say, obviously the NHS, we've worked really hard on working with the NHS about updating their site on that, and go to places like Wellbeing of Women. Wellbeing of Women are a charity and they have immense resources. Go to the Menopause Mandate website where you'll see conversations between, little cartoon conversations between a doctor and a patient describing symptoms, and it will talk about what different treatments are available. Go on the British Menopause Society website, look at is there a menopause specialist in your area? An NHS, they will have a list and you can look to see if there's an NHS specialist in your area. Or go on to Louise Newson's Balance app, and which has a whole host of information in lots of different languages about any subject around menopause that you would ever want to know. If you go to your doctor, and the statistics tell us that the average woman, whatever the average woman is, will visit the doctor between 5 and 8 times before they're offered treatment for their menopause, which I mean, it's hard enough to get one appointment. So I don't, and this is when you're feeling your least resilient, right? And you're having to battle to get this. And this is why a lot of women end up, spending money, on supplements that have no, proven clinical efficacy, or spending money on seeing people privately that they can't afford. So go and look at all those things, and then and also ask people. And this is what I say to people. I can tell you now, if I'm in Winchester and people say to me, oh, I've had a brilliant experience with the menopause, I can tell you now which surgery they're at, because I know they have a menopause nurse there, and she's brilliant. And everyone I know who is at that surgery says, "Oh, I've had a fantastic experience."
So find out where there's a menopause nurse and choose a GP.
Yes, ask the receptionist who's interested in women's health. Who should I see about women's health or menopause? And there is usually, and this often it isn't the GP. So they're often nurses, and often now pharmacists. A lot of pharmacists have been trained to run menopause clinic, and are brilliant out there in terms of menopause advocates as well. So, but ask other women, but also look at these other resources to really educate yourself.
Well, what I'm hearing, not just what you're sharing, I mean, I feel like we need to put a list of resources at the on the show notes for today's conversation, because you're sharing a real treasure chest of where people can get support, different resources that are on the internet. I mean, I've been through my menopause. It's a bit late for me. It's worse. Is it ever too late? There's still things I'm contending with health-wise with regards to being postmenopausal. I hadn't realised just the plethora of choice that there was out there and resources that there are that can support women. So it's really, really encouraging and good to know. I would like to move on and talk about Menopause Mandate, because I think Menopause Mandate itself sounds like a really exciting organisation that you are now co-chair of. And I love the way you describe yourselves as the coalition of campaigners with the goal to revolutionise and support women's health, the way they receive health, but also the way the wider society responds and reacts to women's health. Tell me more about your involvement and what you hope for with being co-chair of this organisation.
Yes, absolutely. So I first became involved with Menopause Mandate, I would think, about 4 years ago, in my role as general manager at Theramex, as a corporate partner, really. Laura and Mariella had put this organisation together along with Carolyn Harris, who's just a giant of a women's health advocate in the Labour Party, and they were starting to campaign around this HRT one prescription cost. So because Carolyn, who's a Welsh MP, hadn't realised she got her HRT for free, and she hadn't realised that that was not the case in England, where women who are sometimes on, maybe 3 or 4 different types of HRT were paying a lot in prescription charges. And for some women, that is prohibitive. So they decided to get this group of women together, and very high profile women. So Davina and obviously Mariella was leading it, and then Lisa Snowdon and Penny Lancaster, and lots of different women who were all going through their own menopause journey. Carol Vorderman is a great voice in it and is brilliant. All came together to really use their platforms. Now, there's been a lot of, it's interesting, isn't it? Because when women do this, they get a lot of backlash. So there's been a lot of backlash from people going, oh, I don't think it's up to, celebrities to talk about this. Absolutely, it is. They have every right to use their platforms for good. They're running Instagram webinars with doctors talking about their own experiences of menopause and really raising the awareness. And, let's be clear, Davina has done a huge amount for that in raising awareness for women. So it started off like that. We were a corporate funder, and we were engaging with them to put resources together. So there's been like videos made, like I said, on their website that that we helped fund, and booklets for women, so resources that were available to women. And then we worked, and I became more and more involved because, I was obviously trying to influence politicians at the same time. And then we had the campaign around the 40 plus check and asking the questions in the 40 plus check, which we all campaigned very aggressively for, both as Menopause Mandate and as individuals with the health secretary. And I think in the end he just gave in and just said, "Oh God, yeah, okay, I'll I'll do it," and he got a lot of love for that. So I think it worked out for him. But and that's really how it started. And it is, so our mandate is really to work on, so now it's about how do we make that 40 plus check happen for all women, and how do we make sure that the questions do happen and that women are given the right information. And the second part of our mandate, I think, is in the menopause, or in the women's new revised women's health strategy, to look specifically at the actions around menopause and hold people to account. And whilst you're holding people to account, I think what we're very good at Menopause Mandate is working with other charities, like I say, Wellbeing of Women, with Leslie Regan, who's the Women's Health Ambassador, and going, look, there is no money. We're not going to be given a blank check. So and this is what women are brilliant at, how do we resourcefully make this happen together, with the Royal College of Gynecologists and all these different groups? How do we really push to make sure that this has an impact? Because the women's health strategy is just a strategy. You and I have written strategies all our lives, right? It's meaningless unless somebody is actually going to deliver on that strategy. And it has to deliver for all women, not just women that live in Wimbledon or Winchester or wherever, you happen to live. It has to deliver for all women. It has to look at different, for example, no GPs know that Southeast Asian women go through menopause earlier. Well, not many GPs know that, unless they're specialists, that Southeast Asian women go through menopause earlier, or that Black women present with very different menopausal symptoms. This is the nuances of being able to care for women as a huge population. And, Leslie Regan always talks about, women hold up half the sky. And, it's really, really important that we continue to, as a group at Menopause Mandate, to continue to advocate for menopause, because people think the conversation's done. People say to me all the time, "Oh, it's sorted now, menopause." It's very far from sorted. Only 20% of women that could have treatment for menopause in this country, in that age range, choose or are offered it.
Wow, that's quite a figure, isn't it?
And that's much
such
higher.
a low figure. That's higher than it was.
It's higher than it was. And if you go to places like Spain and Italy and France, it's like 3-4%.
Goodness me. So we should be grateful for small mercies, but it doesn't mean we got to rest on our laurels either.
No, not at all.
So definitely making progress, which is really good to hear, and great to hear that you're looking at getting strategy into action and making it happen, which is really, really good.
Yes.
I want to fast forward 10 years. What would genuine progress in women's health equality look like for you in 10 years' time?
I think we wouldn't need to have people like Menopause Mandate. I think we would have women's health hubs in the community where women, and I've seen this happen so successfully in some areas, where women can go and access all the information and the tests that they need, where we have proper education in schools by people that know what they're talking about. Again, some of the stuff that my daughter's been told in schools is nonsense, and it's just inaccurate. So I think
in the business world, for the business world and the organizations?
For the business world, I think it would be about having policies, but for those policies to really mean something, so that you had workplace training, that everyone went through workplace training on menopause. Everyone knew how to support somebody through a fertility journey. Everyone knew about, that the Department of Work and Pensions perhaps had introduced menstrual health leave, as you know, they have in Spain, for women that are suffering from very severe gynecological issues like endometriosis or adenomyosis or any of those things, that there is an understanding of it and that there's no shame, and that women are happy to talk about it, that they feel in a workplace that they're able to say, this is what I'm going through at the moment and how can you support me? Whereas at the moment, there's still, you know, like when we were young and you used to hide your Tampax up the sleeve, there's still an element of that, right, where we're ashamed to talk about the things that happen to us, and yet we have no control over them. So that's what utopia would look like from my point of view.
Yes, well, let's keep working towards that. It's fantastic what you're doing. So, I mean, obviously, this podcast, we're talking about an undiscussable today because women's health doesn't get discussed enough and the impact it has on the workplace. But what do you hope women stop accepting and start asking for when it comes to their health, careers, and their lives?
I hope that women stop hiding their conditions and that they are much more, feel that they can have much more discussion about it. You know, if a woman, if I was, you know, in a leadership position in an organization, I would hope that, and they have, women could come and talk to me about it, but also that men could come and talk to you about, you know, things that were going on in their lives with their partners or their wives or their daughters or their mothers. And that it would be much more open, where I think women feel that because, and this is where the inequity thing comes in, that, you know, that we've got to be as good or better, we've got to be better than men, and we've got to show up more, and we've got to just put a brave face on it to be taken seriously. And, you know, I have been very criticized for my career by male colleagues for being too empathetic, being, you know, and almost saying being too nice, right? Because you're the one that people talk to about things. And yet we know that's not true, because, you know, my results have always been better than theirs. And, you know, and it's about doing things with people and not to people. So I think I would like it if, you know, like to think that women could have those open conversations, and that organizations would not see it as weakness, that they would go out of their way to say, we've taken the time and the money to bring this woman into the organization. How can we support her through this part of her life?
Tina, you are a real force to be reckoned with. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you, and what I've really loved is what a fascinating career journey and life journey you've had, but also the stand you are taking for women's health and women's equality. I want to ask you one final question. If the young girl growing up in the children's home, so remember yourself as a young girl growing up in the children's home, could see you now, the leader, the advocate that you are, and the woman you've become, what do you think she would say?
I think she would say that was always what you were meant to do. I think that, so I've always had an innate belief that when my parents died in a car crash and I was on the back seat, and don't forget this was in the 70s, right? We were in carry cots on the back seat, not in car seats. And I survived. I've always had a belief that was meant to do something useful for women. And that's what got me through the tough years of being in a children's home and other tough parts of my life. So yes, I think that's what she would think.
Gosh, you are such a fantastic role model from that point of view, because you are really demonstrating how belief can carry you through, but also having that very clear purpose and desire to make a difference for
Yes,
women's
definitely.
health and equality. Fantastic.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
Mary.
so
Thank you
much.
so much. It's been so lovely talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the She Leads Collective podcast. If this episode resonated with you, follow the show or share it with a friend and leave a quick review below. Or leave us a comment. Change happens through conversation, so let's keep this one going. Listen out for the next episode and join me as we keep lifting the lid on the stories that matter. Take care and keep leading with heart.